Alright, g'day everyone. Welcome to the Energeia podcast. This is Dr. G, your hostess, Donette's host, with the mostest as always, and today I'm going to be speaking with Dan Munro. Dan is a confidence and integrity coach who specializes in helping people with nice guy syndrome and people-pleasing syndrome to become more honest and more assertive and more courageous. He is the founder of the Inspirational Lifestyle and the Brojo Self-Development Community, as well as a host of the Brojo Podcast. Dan is also the author of 3 books, The Legendary Life, Nothing to Lose, and The Naked Truth, and is a prolific blogger and commentator within the wider personal development and coaching spaces. Dan, bro, cheers for joining me today.
Thanks, man. That was a cool intro. I didn't realize I'd done so much shit. It's nice.
Yeah, man, you're a lot more prolific than you maybe give yourself credit for. Now, you and I, we originally connected during our time working together in the music industry, and maybe we could, revisit that original connection a little later. But to start with, could you give us the broad strokes of your current professional career, what your main vocational interests and specializations are, and just kind of the background story behind what got you to the position that you're in now and the work that you do?
Cool, yeah. And you know what? Back when we first met is a key time, because that was the before picture, actually, so we might talk about that. I mean, my main work, I guess, the stuff I get paid for is the coaching, mostly one-to-one, sometimes groups. I don't like to call it life coach because it's just a cheese dick term and it's not what I think of myself as, but basically I spend a majority of my time helping guys who have nice guy syndrome, which is an unrecognized psychological disorder, but a prolific one at that. And a lot of people know of it as people-pleasing and such, but it's a very specific thing. For my niche is guys who have this disability emotionally, essentially. They cannot experience a range of emotions without getting extremely uncomfortable, and because of this they get into a very controlling persona. So they try to control the emotions of others, control their own. Leads to lots of very sort of covert manipulative behaviours that we call people-pleasing or being nice, which is usually anything but. It's quite a nasty thing to do in a sense. And I got into that work because I was one for most of my life, or I should say I am one in recovery. It's kind of like an addiction that maybe never is fully cured, or at least it should be treated like that, you know, so that you never slip. And I had to work on it myself because my life sucked as a result. I mean, ostensibly on the outside it looked like I was achieving and succeeding and so on, especially in my career, not so much in my social life. But on the inside, I just didn't like who I was. So much anxiety, I couldn't sleep and so on, and that was for many years. So the short story is I sorted my own shit out, and then I realized how many others there were out there, and I felt for them and wanted to be the guy that I didn't have. You know, it took me years to do it on my own, and I realized if I'd had someone who knew what they were doing and understood it, it could have just taken a few months to get through the main shit. So I became that guy that I didn't have, essentially. My background is in psychology. I guess that's when I did a psych degree, it first kicked off the idea that maybe there is a cause and effect that I can understand about why my life is the way it is, you know. But it was many years after the degree that I actually clicked as to what was going on. I was still very much a nice guy for many years after that. It's just the seeds were planted. And then I worked in the Department of Corrections with criminal offenders, and that's when I got to look across the table and see what I was, but being played out in a different way. And in particular, dishonesty. So as I started to work with very dishonest people and started to see eye to eye with them, like I might not be murdering and stealing, but I'm certainly doing all the other dishonest stuff that they do in the social world. I started to realize I've got a problem with honesty, and it was the deep dive into that problem that led me to discover what nice guy syndrome was and how dishonest I'd been my whole life and so on, which we can get into more detail on. So I set about resolving that and ended up coaching people with it. And when you met me, when I was in the band, I was probably at the beginning of my awareness and development of it, but I was right in the thick of it. So I might not have been too bad with you when we first met, but there would have been elements of it. I would have been trying to make you think I was cool or funny or something. But especially with women or people that I didn't feel safe with, I was pretty bad back then. So the guy you met has changed a lot. But we've talked about that before, I think. But yeah, that kind of sums up what I do and where it comes from in a very brief, concise way, I guess.
Yeah, and look, I mean, I've followed your trajectory over, since the time period you mentioned, and how you've developed as a coach, how your career's developed, and I think for me, I mean, the most laudable and notable part of your work, that the part of your work that has had the most impact on me is just what you've just been describing about people pleasing, about this nice guy syndrome. I see a lot of it in myself. I think that the term nice guy in recovery is kind of an apt one. I mean, I feel the same way. I feel like it's something I've never and may never quite transition into full remission of, if you know what I mean, or from. I think where I've improved these days is I'm more mindful and more aware as it's happening, and I kind of have the toolkit in place now to kind of throw the circuit breaker as it's happening when I maybe didn't in the past. And I mean, I got to give you a lot of credit for that, for the imprint that your work has left on me, the impression that your work has left on me in that respect. But I think if we just probe into this area a little bit more, because there really is a counterintuitive element to this for so many people, right? Like people just assume that even if you take a fairly uncharitable interpretation of what people pleasing is all about, if you recognize that people pleasing is not good behavior, it's not character building behavior, it's potentially pathological behavior, and it's potentially behavior that's going to lead you into all sorts of cul-de-sacs and areas of misdevelopment in your life, people still have this nagging, lingering, residual feeling that at least it's motivated from a good place. And I think your work has really shone a light, for me at least, on the fact that that element of this proposition is not true. And I wonder if you could sort of just like flesh out for us a little bit more why you think this is not only not true, but as you've sort of said in some of your writing and your commentary, why this is actually kind of a sickness in some sense, that this is actually legitimately deleterious behavior, and it's not actually motivated from a good and decent place.
Yeah, well, I'll sort of steelman that argument a little bit by saying I think the initial impulse with nice guys can come from, say, a value of compassion, genuine empathy. And so, I mean, a lot of us have quite strong empathy. We know how other people feel. In fact, that's a weapon. We can use that to manipulate people because we're pretty good at reading them and so on. And if you were to scratch away all insecurity, if you were to put a nice guy on 2 tabs of ecstasy, you'll find that they do genuinely love people. In most cases, there is a segment of them that are quite psychopathic and really quite scary. But in a sense, there is some goodness in the initial intention, we could say. But it gets so tainted and so poisoned on the way out. I think of it as like a bill going through committees, and it ends up with all these amendments, and by the time it gets out, it's a shadow of its former self. It's now this harmful thing. That's how I read most nice guy stuff. We start off with this general thing, I want to be a good person, but that loaded term gets so confused and so packed full of insecurity and so guided by childhood wounds and trauma that it ends up becoming basically mega manipulation. It becomes this persona. I thought of it as method acting, where actually we become a part that controls people, and we call it people pleasing. And quite often some people say, oh, I'm a bit of a people pleaser, and they're humble bragging. What they're saying is like, yeah, I know it's a bit weak, but I'm a good person. No, you're not. You're the most manipulative person in the room. And this is the hardest bit for any nice guy or people pleaser to swallow, but it's the thing that has to be accepted before any work can be done, is that all of this just comes from this really kind of just pathological imperative to control everybody so that there's no harm to you, and so that you can live this smooth, problem-free life. And even if that harms others, there's a part of you that's okay with that. A great example, I think the most compelling example, is somebody who will people please their way into a relationship with someone. And this is a little breakthrough I had where I used to work with various thieves in corrections. And I'd be like, this dude's getting like 2 years in prison for stealing a car. I once stole 2.5 years from someone with a relationship. I get nothing. I don't even get a slap on the wrist for that. I'd much rather you take my car than my life, you know? 2.5 years by making me think I was in a relationship with a person who doesn't even fucking exist. This act. I mean, think of the betrayal to find out that your partner of multiple years isn't real. It'd be like being on the Truman Show or something, you know. I've actually, my ex, I talked to her about this, and she just can't accept that I was faking. She just doesn't want to believe that I had her, you know, that I got her that bad. I'm not saying I was nothing but fake, but there's a lot of fakeness there. So this idea, yeah, that we're a good person, we just maybe lack a bit of a backbone or something, but generally we're just trying to do good in the world. Maybe one day you'll be that person, but right now your primary motive is to be in control, even if that harms others. And it's not coming from a healthy place at all, not even remotely. It comes from childhood wounds, it comes from attachment disorders, essentially. Now that I'm a father, I can see how early it begins, and maybe it really gets set in place before we even form memories that we can recall, you know, and so on. So once a person can go, I'm sick and what I'm doing is not healthy, then they've got a shot. They've got a shot at correcting this. And they can even do what I call a 360, which is at the end of all their work, they're still doing the same behaviours, essentially, but for completely different reasons. And now it's healthy. Now when you're a good person, you're actually doing it to be a good person, because you're also willing to be controversial, you're also willing to have confrontations, you're also sticking up for yourself and have self-respect. You've like added on all these kind of strong masculine layers, but you're still compassionate, you're still helpful, you're still kind, you're still empathetic. It's just now you're not pathetic about it. Now you're not doing it for these like really sort of low, sneaky reasons. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And actually, I mean, two things there. I mean, one, I think the 360 idea lands with me a lot. I think at that point you go from kind of becoming a people pleaser to a people server, or at least going from a people pleaser in the way it's traditionally conceived of in this kind of negative light. You do that 360 and you go to a state where you are genuinely motivated from a position of empathy. You are genuinely motivated from a place of altruism and wanting to serve others, and it's not just a monkey dance to kind of manipulatively, you know, serve your own ends and so forth. And but what I really liked about what you just said was this idea of you know, a guy goes to prison for 2 years for stealing a car. No justice is served to you for stealing 2 years of someone's life. And I mean, when you think about all the times that any of us have people pleased in our relationships, placated in our relationships, gave less than honest accountings of who we are, what we think, what we feel, what our genuine response is to the people we supposedly love the most. All the times that we do that, you add that up in the aggregate, and the people that are closest to us are being sold a false psychological bill of goods. You know, they're spending untold amounts of time in their own lives speaking to what's effectively a psychological phantom. Like someone who is just there window dressing their own persona, again, ostensibly for your benefit, but very much for their own, just to assuage their own insecurities and their own inadequacies and so forth. That's actually a really, really powerful idea, I think. The fact that, when you bring it to that level, if you really take the emphasis away from people pleasers being motivated at their core by wanting to serve others, flip it on its head and sort of address it in terms of people pleasers are actually selfish, self-entitled, self-aggrandizing egoists that are actually, as you alluded to, robbing people of, valuable time in their own lives. So I'm fully like those analogies land with me in an incredibly visceral way, and intuitively now, especially having read your work and the work of some other people, it lands with me in a way where it's stuck with me, and yet I feel like that counterintuitiveness is still going to be so much of a hurdle for so many people to climb. Right, like what do you? Tell me what you think about this. If you were to say to the average person, when you people please, or when you try and placate your spouse or significant other for the sake of smoothing the waters of the relationship, you are actually depriving that person of quality time in their own life. What do you think most people's response would be to that proposition, and how do we get people to see it from the perspective that you and I are coming at it from?
Generally that's on a case-by-case basis. Everybody's got like the window where it speaks to them. A classic that works with a lot of people is just to reverse it. If they did that to you, how would you feel? And that's where they get a little slap, like, oh, I don't want them to do that. I get a say, for example, when people are dating and they're sort of stringing someone along because they don't want to reject them. I'm like, when you're chasing someone who's not interested, what do you want them to do? So just tell me that they're not interested so I don't waste my time. Right. So what are you doing? What I've found, one of the many, many reasons that I focus on honesty so just religiously is because a person can be in really strong denial about people-pleasing. I cover a lot of it in my book. There's these beliefs that we paper over people-pleasing, like overall because the other person is pleased, we must be doing good, and the universe needs to be fair, and I'm trying to counterbalance the badness in the universe. There's lots of arguments that you can get into with people-pleasers where they justify their behaviour, and they cling to these arguments even in the spite of like strong evidence. But one that they really struggle with is the honesty argument. See, what I've found is generally it's very hard to call yourself a good person and a dishonest person at the same time. It's very hard to reconcile those two. You can't say I'm a good dishonest person. So rather than attacking whether or not they're a good person, I attack whether or not they're an honest person. And that one is, their world starts to fall apart when we have that conversation. One of the beliefs I talk about is I'm basically an honest person, that belief. I'm like, okay, let's test that, shall we? So last time your wife pissed you off, what did you say? Did you say you pissed me off? Or did you say something else, which is dishonest? When you are talking to someone and you don't like them, do you say I don't like you, or do you say something else, or do you do something else? When your boss makes a joke that's not funny, what do you do? And so on. And we have to go into the person's case by case. I'll just dig up like what happened last time. This happened. Quite often I go for confrontations because that's one of the universal things where nice guys tend to people please, is when things are getting yucky emotionally, conflict. Backing down or throwing a tantrum or conniving and manipulating. Very rarely just vulnerably being honest and letting the chips fall where they may, sort of thing. And before long we've got them just admitting, I lied there, I lie in this situation, I always lie in that situation, I hide this, I pretend that. I'm like, okay, so with that list, are you an honest person? And if not, what's this whole idea about you being a good person? Would you say somebody else this dishonest is a good person? Would you like it if someone else was that dishonest with you? And so on. And that's where we get just that hypocrisy. I don't want to be treated like that by someone else, and yet I'm doing it. That's what hit me when I was working with criminal offenders, because they used to manipulate the shit out of me. I had to get specialist training and everything to deal with it. And I was working with quite psychopathic personalities, and I was getting manipulated to fuck. And I hated it. And then I'm like, well, what am I doing? I'm even better at it than some of these guys. I have everyone believing that I'm this thing that doesn't exist. I mean, how good is that? I have my own family conned. How would I like it if they did that to me? I mean, I hate having it done to me. And not just in the moment having it done, which is, I usually know it's happening, or something's happening, so I don't like the conversation, it's a bit yuck. But the long-term relationship, when I know that somebody's kind of fake with me all the time, and the disconnect I feel. But also on the most sort of self-serving level, I came to realize the connection between dishonesty and loneliness. Dishonesty is a disconnect with reality. It's a disconnect with the truth, which is a disconnect from everything. And then when I convince somebody else, when I con them, I disconnect them from reality. I gaslight them, I have them believing that this thing exists that doesn't, which has so many ramifications. Everything that's connected to me is now fake. So they believe everything that comes out of my mouth. They're believing all is lies. The whole world's being shaped by this thing. It's like living in virtual reality. It's fucked. And when you get to that level with someone, when you get them sort of talking about how they're doing that to people and to themselves, generally it's around there that they'll have their this is more bad than it is good crisis.
That epiphanic moment.
Right. If they're ready.
Yeah, right.
And usually by the time they come to someone like me, they're ready. I don't actually have to push that hard with this because their life's already in the fucking toilet, basically, at least in their perspective. They're ready to try anything else.
Right. And I mean, you spoke, just at the beginning of what you were saying just then about this being case by case. I mean, is the best we can actually hope for kind of helping people at the margins or on the periphery? Because it feels like to me we have just built this whole civilizational edifice of dishonesty and lying that's just kind of unwound since the dawn of man, that basically it's just been lies supplanting lies, dishonesty in supposedly strategic and coordinated directions to whatever end, supposedly good, supposedly bad. There's this whole tapestry of dishonesty that is just so foundational in our civilization now. And so when you coach people out of this mindset or trying to coach them away from this mindset, are you in effect having to coach them to sort of play around the game or work outside the rules of the game rather than playing the game itself?
Rather, I'm trying to create leaders, I think. Partly because that's the only way to be fully honest, is you can't game. If you want to step into the place where there's zero integrity issues left, you actually have to really break the system. There's some promising things I've seen, because I've had more than 100 one-to-one clients at this point, and done groups, and obviously done sort of peripheral stuff with content and all that. And what I've found is we might be at the beginning of a wave where people are kind of yearning for this honesty thing. At least I hope that. I hope I'm not just sort of overly optimistic. But as you say, we've been living a lie since history started. I mean, if you take politeness and you think that's basically lying, then that's it. That's all this global society covered as being liars. Anybody who's polite is probably faking something. It's very rare that politeness comes from a genuine, impulsive, emotional place.
Do you really believe that, though? That particular point?
I believe there will be times where politeness and honesty coincide, but generally politeness is trained behaviour. If I say please and sorry, and if I sort of let the old person sit on the bus and I stand, it's not something that I've come to of my own value system. It's something I've been trained to do. And generally when we've been trained to do something and we can't remember the initial why, the initial cause or the initial kind of principle behind the behaviour, then we're stepping into dishonesty. or at least unconsciousness.
But what about something like reading then, in which case none of us remember how we came to read in the first place. No, none of us remember how we came to be literate in the first place. So is there some kind of, could you draw a comparable analog there with something like being well-mannered, that it's something that we were trained to do it. We were trained to do it from an early age, but it's something which was a formative and necessary part of our development in the way that literacy is. And the fact that it's come onto autopilot later in life really actually just says nothing about whether it's an act of dishonesty or otherwise.
Well, I'm probably quite radical in my views here, but without needing to get into a subjective debate, what we can say is there's really no reason why a person can't stop right now and question why they do everything. So if you are polite as by nature, just stop and check in. Do I know why I'm doing this? Does it still align with my value system? If I had no fears of rejection or humiliation or ostracism, would I still behave like this? And if the answer after all of that deep, honest inquiry is yes, then go ahead. You have my blessing, But what I've found with my clients is at the end of that inquiry, the answer is usually no. It's not. I wouldn't do this if there weren't social consequences. I wouldn't do this if I wasn't worried about this, that, and the other happening. I don't do this with my best friends. I don't do this with the people I feel safe with. I only do it with the people I feel unsafe with. And that's all warning signs that this isn't real. This isn't you. This is the act, So it's not like a clear-cut across society case, even though I sort of said it like that. What I'd say is more, I'm yet to find someone who's polite all the time for a reason that convinces me that they're doing it in a healthy way. I'm yet to find someone where I'm like, okay, no, that's just who they are, once I've dug in.
All right, because there was something, I think it was actually in one of your books, or maybe I read it somewhere else, that the kind of interesting, I guess, edge case for me here is the use of the term sorry in the English language, and how abundantly, perhaps overabundantly, this term is actually used. I mean, I say it a lot. I say it, and I say it a lot in a way for which its autopilot nature is truly revealed by the fact that if to take your point, if someone said to me, are you really sorry about what you just said sorry for? My answer would be no. And yet I would argue that sorry, you don't actually need to probe something like that with that much depth. I think that basically because language evolves, something like sorry in the English language is kind of like, it's like the word alors in the French language. It's kind of a conversational connector more than it is anything revealing about the depth or substance of what the word really means. So when you say sorry or excuse me in the way that many of us do, it's kind of just an off-the-cuff sequence generator or sequence continua, so that basically you're recognizing where. Trying to think of a good example here. So, saying sorry because I'm 5 minutes late or something like that, even though I'm genuinely not sorry about it. I'm not apologetic in any deep sense of the word. It's just basically my way of using the English language as an indicator of my non-compliance, not regret, but non-compliance with a social convention that I've transgressed, and a simple colloquial use of the English language to kind of paper over that crack. And I don't think I'm doing it in a manipulative way. I mean, you push back where you think I'm wrong here, but I think, I think a word like sorry, and I apologize if I'm misrepresenting your view on this take, but I think with a word like sorry, you don't actually need to probe the literal meaning of what the term actually means, because it actually has this other utility in English language which doesn't suggest dishonesty or being manipulative or anything like that.
Good point. What I'd say is if you're a truly confident person, no, you don't need a deep dive into the word sorry. It has the same social convention as maybe a handshake, which you wouldn't do naturally anyway. But for most people, and especially for nice guys, yeah, you need to probe that word. because it says sorry for who I am. You've been trained to say it. It comes with this belief system of I'm an inconvenience. If something's gone wrong, it's probably my fault. It's an iceberg. The word sorry has this huge thing under it, and it's not some little thing. Especially when you look at alternatives. One way to look at it is, rather than argue whether or not sorry is a big deal, you ask, could I be more honest? And there's other ways. Let's say I'm late to the meeting. I can say thanks for waiting, which is actually more how I feel. For putting up for, I'm a late guy, I put up with my bullshit. I'm not actually sorry about it, but I appreciate that other people don't ostracize me. I appreciate that you guys will put up with this kind of shit. Or even you might say, if you're getting really sophisticated with your honesty and you think, what would I do in the same situation? And I'm okay with someone being 5 minutes late, especially if we have a good relationship and I know it's not disrespect, blah, blah, blah. I might say it from that perspective. I'd be like, I respect the fact that you guys can put up with me being 5 minutes late. I'll do the same for you. The trouble with a word like sorry is, like many other sort of polite terms, is it's a shortcut. I don't want to say all of that, so I just say sorry. But then I lose the meaning. If I'm cutting down the language, I get into losing what I initially had cut down, and the meaning changes. And then sorry, for a lot of people, sorry is just a sound they make. And again, my radical perspective is, if you want to be truly honest and you want to have full integrity, there can't be any unconscious pattern conditional language like that. You can't just be saying stuff with no idea why you're saying it, because the implications can be massive. Sometimes they can be minor. There are some people who say sorry every now and then. They're going to live a happy life, that they don't need to worry about this. But there's other people where that sorry is part of a group of language patterns that are actually cutting them off at the knees throughout their life. It's reinforcing negative beliefs. If I say, the classic example I use, you bump into someone, you say sorry. How do you know it's not their fault? Why are you automatically the one who caused the bump? What does that imply? When you say sorry, you're making it true, whatever that implication is. You're claiming it. You're saying guilty as charged. And your brain picks up on that evidence. It's one of the things I learned about recently. I was studying agoraphobia, and the idea that people who don't leave their house, or let's say they make a break for it, I'm going to go to the shops today. They get halfway, they panic, and they run home. The brain actually goes, the shops must be dangerous. And the brain will actually measure your own behaviour as evidence. And this is where language gets really dangerous, is if I start talking about myself like I'm a bad person, I start to form a belief that that's true. So coming back to you, sorry is a good one, or apologising in general is a good one. Is if you're going to apologise, at least do a few weeks or a few months work just to make sure you know why you're doing it, what it means, and then you can go back to saying sorry. Like I said, you can go 360 and you go, okay, I know what that word entails now. It's a safe word. I don't need to worry about it. But for a nice guy, the word sorry is loaded as fuck, and they do need to worry about it. At least I did.
Yeah, and I think that's a reasonable passing out of where, it can be psychologically different for different people. The ultimate source of why you do say sorry is important. I agree with you. I think for some people, you do need to probe that. You do need to sort of sit down and reckon with what is the ultimate source of why I actually have this reflexive response. Because, my I guess surface level take, especially when I was living in the American Midwest. In the American Midwest, people are over the top polite. They're such a well-mannered, nice, kind, decent people, especially when it comes to etiquette and politeness. Bumping into someone in the street, you are pretty much guaranteed to say sorry at the exact same time as that other person. There's pretty much never going to be same as here in Vietnam, people say xin loi or excuse me when you bump into them. Now, this is where I sort of find your thesis maybe a little bit questionable. I get what you're saying with respect to the actual nice guys, the actual guys that maybe, there is some deleterious reason behind why they're overly apologetic, that they haven't grappled with, that they need to grapple with. But your average Joe Schmo on the street, the vast majority of people when they are bumping into someone and both people are saying sorry reflexively at the same time, does it really go any deeper than that most of the time?
If you compartmentalize that example of bumping someone to a street, no. But if you go to the overall pattern where you have a reflexive apology for something going wrong, then yeah. And when you say average Joe, the average Joe is a nice guy. I really do believe the nice guy syndrome is prolific. The prevalence is above 50%. I don't have any proof of this because this isn't studied in any major way. But it's like being an addict in recovery. You can spot drug addicts everywhere. You know the signs. You've lived with them. You were one. You know when somebody's on the wagon again or whatever, off the wagon. It's like that for me. I walk around, I just see them everywhere. Sometimes it's just in body language and I can't confirm it. Other times it's the way they talk to me. I'm like, you're fucking people-pleasing me. One of my favourite things in the world is walking past a couple that's clearly on their first date and just watching what I think of as a horror show of acting, where like the real people aren't even there, you know, they're behind the screen making the puppet dance for the other puppet. So the average, like I said, it's a fair point. The little reflexive bump thing, sorry, is just saying like, I'm not your enemy, that wasn't on purpose. Just reassuring you like social harmony still exists, carry on your day, I'm not a dick, this isn't a threat. I get that. You know, chimpanzees would flash their teeth and it means the same thing. But what you'll find is often, and I do believe more often than not, can't prove it, just believe it, is that same person who does the reflexive sorry when they bump is also the person who says sorry when their partner's upset even though they didn't do anything. And they say sorry when somebody disagrees with them even though the other person's wrong. And there's a pattern. And that's sorry. Like, if you're going to have to, if you want to deal with that pattern of you sort of eating shit all the time and you being fake all the time and you placating people rather than being real, you have to address all the sorries because you don't know where it's happening. You don't know which one's the one that can be safely ignored. Even because that's the thing I get, like when I do work with people and do the deep work, we do kind of like a wipe the whiteboard clean and rewrite from scratch, and again you get the 360 thing. So you might be a person who impulsively, like if you see someone trying to pack their car with heavy boxes, you go help out. If you're that person, I'll challenge you to not do that for a while just to make sure you're doing it for the right reasons. When you don't do it, how do you feel? Do you get extremely uncomfortable? Do you get guilt-ridden and ashamed? Do you ever step back and go, does this person actually want to do it on their own? Do they actually get some sense of reward from completing the job without my intervention? Question it first, and then if after all that, you're like, yeah, I'm cool with the reasons I do this. This is genuine. Then keep doing it. Go back to it. Say sorry again, whatever. At least, like, put it this way, I'll still say sorry every now and then. But I'm really, really sensitive when it's happening. I'm like, is that a good one? I know it's a very bad word for me in my history. It used to be a word that represented pretty much everything that was wrong with me. So I have to watch that one. I have to watch when I help people. I have to watch when I try to convince someone of an idea, because that's my high risk of relapse area. I have to watch it when somebody else is in a high emotional state, how I respond to them. If they're upset or angry or two people are arguing with each other, before I step in, I have to go, wait, I used to do this for really, really bad reasons. Let's check in. Let's slow this down a bit. And then if I still want to, after I've kind of run it through my little values filter, it's fine. The behaviour itself on paper is neutral. But the why behind it could reveal everything that's wrong with your life. So I pick up on sorry just because it's such a prevalent one for nice guys. Same as helping people, same as sulking, same as avoiding conflict. There's a few others. But yeah, I think in general, like, okay, I've been to America as well. How would you know who your enemies are in that Midwest place? You know, you wouldn't have a clue who's about to stab you in the back. And if I'm someone's enemy, which is rare, I think it's aligned with my values that they're aware of that. I don't want to hide that from them. And this act of politeness would hide that. If an argument I get quite often with the politeness one is, saying thank you when you get a present for Christmas that you don't actually feel grateful for, right? Or saying that meal was delicious when somebody else cooked it for you. You know, that you receive something and you pretend that you actually liked it when you didn't. And that's a really like strong emotional argument for a good reason to fake it. But I like cooking now. And the one thing I want is when someone eats my food, tell me exactly how it tasted, because I can make it better next time. I want to be a better cook. If I get someone a present, especially like my partner, who's actually kind of a nightmare to buy for, and she's one of the most honest people I know, she'll tell me if I bought her a shit gift. Good. I can recalibrate what she wants. I want to give her something she wants. Right? I don't want to give her something she secretly loathes and is going to stuff in the bin.
Yeah.
You know?
That is far more desirable than this fucking dance of, what do they say on Seinfeld? Tube socks.
Right.
You're great. Yeah, they're having to put this performative act on of gratitude, and yet, I mean, that for me is an especially salient example, because frankly, I don't think I've quite worked out my own strategy on that front. I don't think I've quite worked out my own best way of navigating those waters yet. Like, I feel like with that one, my innate inclination still is to try and not as bad as I used to be, like certainly not the, I don't have to summon the, but it'll be, something like, I'm so grateful, thank you very much kind of thing. And without, I guess my rationale in the moment being, well, there's no real advantage to me telling them that they bought me a shit gift. It should be the thought that counts, and that's the ultimate upside of it and all that kind of thing. But I mean, you're right. I mean, ultimately, you push a little bit beyond the surface there, and you're kind of like, well, do I value my relationship with this person? If the answer is yes, and you would like to have the kind of relationship based on this continued spirit of mutual generosity, for which, gift giving is just one ritualistic element of that, then yeah, perfect world, ideal world, I would like to receive a gift from someone that I actually like, and I would like to be able to give them gifts that they actually like, and I would like to have this be out in the open and and be discussable in a forthright manner. And yet I still feel that pull. I still feel that little bit of pull of, how do I window dress this? How do I kind of conversationally triage this kind of difficult, dicey moment where my on-the-spot response is, another pair of fucking socks, while this other person is looking at me going, I really hope they like the socks. So, I mean, I kind of feel the pull both ways in that one. I think conceptually, intellectually, I'm with you there all the way, and yet as a matter of experience, work in progress, big time. Hand on my own heart, work in progress.
Well, that's all I'd ever ask of someone, is that they're honest with themselves about what's actually happening. I mean, in terms of self-confidence and a sense of being connected to reality, that in my mind, the absolute removal of loneliness is about being true to yourself. And if you can at least, put it this way, I know some people that I call natural. They're honest from the day I met them. They've always been that way, but they're not as radically honest as I am. I'm kind of quite far down the end of the spectrum, and I don't expect other people to go there. I don't expect them to have the motivation to go there like I do. For me, it's a personal thing, like how an alcoholic never drinks. They don't expect nobody else, to never drink. That just for them personally, they can't. It's just too dangerous. And I'm like that with dishonesty. Dishonesty is very poisonous to me. I can't have it. I don't expect other people to go as far as me. But there are very honest people I know, and they have exceptions, but it plays out in different ways. So say my brother, he's one of the most ruthless dudes I know. He's so funny. But he might go, oh yeah, choice, thanks. And then he'll come to me later and go, that fucking sucked. Why did you give me that shit? And he doesn't mind admitting to somebody, right? He'll get it out. Or he might talk to the person later or something. He's got his own way where he's like, okay, I've made my peace with how honest I am on this thing. And he's fine with it. And he's clearly a confident guy. And I wouldn't say he needs to do anything in particular to have a better life. I'd say, I always believe more honesty means more integrity and more confidence, but there is a line of confidence, and once you're above it, life is good. You'd only be amusing yourself to go even higher up. You can still get to the end of your life with no regrets. You're not going to get to the end of your life and go, fuck, I should have told them the socks were shit. If the rest of your life has been very confident and full of integrity, you know, these little slips, and I still have little slips, I think I would hesitate if I'm in a conversation with someone I just don't like them to just brutally say, I don't like you out of nowhere. I might sort of, I will get close to it, to give myself credit, but I can't just go straight into it like that one. I'm like, especially if it's like a group at a barbecue, and for me to just, you know, just knock the needle off the record and go, I don't like you, and just cause that scene. I'm still not quite there yet. But with the gift one, I think the issue isn't so much what you do, it's why you do it. And you got to ask yourself, why am I trying to keep the peace? Why am I placating them? Is this for me? Is this for them? Is this for our relationship? Is this the best I can do for us? Now, let's say, for example, some person at the office who I've got no interest in a long-term relationship with of any deep kind gets me a Secret Santa gift I don't like, and it's on my leaving party, and I'm never going to see them again. It's like, I don't need to go to the hassle of this confrontation. I don't need to. But if it's my mum, and I want to have a real relationship with her, and, you know, when I'm holding her hand on her deathbed, I don't want to feel that anything was unsaid that matters with her. I need to bring up the socks thing right away. And it'll only have to happen once. We'll rip that band-aid off, and our relationship will be better after that, and it's worth doing. So we kind of do these measurements of kind of realistic honesty. Like you say, on concept, you go, yeah, I want to do that. And then you get into the moment, you go, oh, that's fucking awful. And you have to make it...
Yeah, it's a lot harder.
All of it, like, whenever I talk conceptually about honesty, I always try to keep in mind that once you're in the thick of the action, it's like training to fight on the pads, and then you get into the ring. You're just like, oh my god, he's actually punching me in the face for real. What the hell's going on? I'm choking. And it can be like that. Like, the worst is... I feel it for people, like, there's a couple of things I'll coach people on in particular. One is confrontation, so standing up for yourself and finally calling out shit. And the other is expressing attraction. Those are two common areas of dishonesty for people, or indirectness at least. And I always have my fingers crossed for a client when they have a go the first time, because if the first reaction they get's an awful one, they're going to really struggle to go for it the second time. I'm really like hoping that they have a lucky shot, because then they're more likely to feel the balls to go again. And I was lucky, like the first time I expressed attraction directly to someone, I got a big smile. And after that I was like, okay, that's at least one in the bag kind of thing. Whereas I've had clients that have ended up like, like getting accused of harassment and stuff on their first go. And you're just like, Jesus, it's going to be hard to do that again. And so it's the same with your situation. You know, the first time you tell someone, look, I appreciate that you went to the effort to get this gift, but this is just not for me. If they react well to that, you'll be more likely to do it again. You'll see that this is possible. But I guess maybe this is a segue into an important part of this. How they react is also going to tell you a lot about the current status of your relationship. And one way to look at it is, if someone who loves me and I love them told me they didn't like their gift, how would I react? If I respect them, I want us to have a good relationship, and I'm not going to take it personally and so on, how would I react? And then I compare that to what they do, and it gives me a sense of where we're at. You know, if I tell my partner that I didn't like her gift, she'll be a bit sad, but not like, she'll just be sad that she got it wrong and she'll want to get it right. And it's a love sadness, right? If she tells me the same thing, I just roll my eyes and laugh, because I'm like, fuck, I'm useless at gifts, you know, I'll take you shopping. Why are we doing this surprise thing? I never get it right. You know, that's how I'd want people to react. Now, if I do this with someone and they're like really defensive, start attacking me, accusing of me of stuff, I've had some situation, not the gift giving, but I've had people like surprisingly react in this really hyper negative way. I've got to stop and check in, like, how good are things with me and this person right now? Maybe it's good that we're finding this out, because I thought we were all good, and this shows that we are not, right? Like, someone I'm all good with is not going to do this. And I guess the reason I'm going into that, I know I'm kind of drifting and ranting a bit, is these moments that we usually paper over with polite kind of dishonesty of some kind are actually critical moments where we can gauge our relationship with someone and steer it back on track or bring it to an end, or something else. Something important could happen here. The gift isn't important, but it's a catalyst. It could be like, what happens when I'm honest with this person and it's not comfortable? And I don't think there's anything more telling about the state of a relationship than that moment. How does someone react to you being confrontationally honest with them in a way that's emotionally uncomfortable? Their reaction is going to tell you a lot about how good things are.
I can't help but segue this into sort of part of a conversation of interest related to my experience here in Vietnam. So, I mean, this is a little bit of devil's advocacy here, but I'm interested to sort of hear your take on this. So here in Vietnam, it's a very, very conflict-averse culture, like a lot of cultures are in the East. So basically, and I've actually been, I teach at a university here in Vietnam. I actually taught a class a few weeks ago about conflict and how in the workplace there's good and bad versions of conflict. You know, there's a kind of healthy, task-oriented conflict, which is all purpose towards, creating better ideas and better solutions for problems in the workplace and better ways of leading people. And, to your point, it's conflict where when you probe the why, the ultimate motivation is about, well, it's to make the business better, right? And you can set that in contrast to, unhealthy, relationship-oriented, dysfunctional conflicts where it's all personal and it's all about grievance and hostility and animosity and causing offense and all that kind of thing. Now, here in Vietnam, because of Confucian values, because of collectivist values, because of the one-party communist apparatus, whatever the ultimate source of it might be. And I think it actually goes way back into sort of more ancient Vietnamese history as well, and not just Vietnam, but most of Confucian Asia. They don't tease apart those healthy and unhealthy versions of conflict in the way that we do. And so for them, it's a very big face-saving culture here. So when they lie to a superior for the sake of saving their own face, they genuinely believe they're doing it for a good reason. They believe they're doing it for a culturally salient, culturally ingrained reason, for which if we were to say to them all the things you've just been talking about, they could accuse us of saying, well, that's just a Western philosophical outlook on the nature of conflict, on the nature of honesty, on the nature of being forthright with people and all that kind of thing. So I just wonder, just kind of your hot take, perhaps, response to that. Do you think everything that you've just said is something that stems from a Western philosophical and ethical foundation, that it actually comes from the fact that you were raised in a Western culture? Presumably most of your clients come from Western cultures, as most of mine do, and that we in the West have this understanding of conflict, this understanding of honesty and being direct with people. And what you mentioned about, would you rather have the person tell you the uncomfortable truth and be a little bit shitty at them for 5 minutes, but then recognize that it was coming from this place where they wanted to do well by you, and they genuinely were motivated from a good place by telling you this uncomfortable truth? Is all of that just an artifact of our Western upbringing? And what would you say to people who come from perhaps an Eastern Confucian tradition, for whom that mindset and that value system has not been bedded in, and the practices and the sort of day-to-day social etiquette does not reflect those values?
Yeah. Well, for a start, I'd say almost half of my clients are Asian. And I don't see any difference in my work with them as to what you might call born Westerners. Secondly, I'm not convinced that Western culture does support this. I would say that while you don't have, say, the Japanese hierarchy of politeness or something like that, we've definitely got a well-embedded, well-accepted pattern of dishonesty in the way we engage. You watch how somebody talks to a teacher at school, watch how somebody talks to their parents. it's very unlikely you're going to see brutal direct honesty. Very unlikely. As unlikely as you would probably in an Eastern culture. I mean, we're Protestant Anglican or whatever the fuck, right? And you know, it was really interesting. What was a massive mindfuck for me was going to the UK, kind of see where I come from, kind of thing. Being New Zealand culture, this kind of offshoot. And just the people pleasing there, it's so thick in the air, it choked me. You know, like to go to a cafe or something, to hear people talk to each other, to have them talk to me, to see like the true hostility underneath it. You quite often get this in people-pleasing cultures from what I've seen is you get a lot of nice politeness on the surface and then you get a lot of like domestic violence and stabbings behind the scenes as all that repressed anger goes somewhere, and the same person who's really yes sir, no sir is the same person who beats his wife and so on. I'm not convinced at all that Asian culture is significantly different with this, other than the sort of manifestation on the surface, how it plays out, the rules around it. The rules are much more probably unspoken and unwritten in white Western Euro culture, but as followed as prison law. You know, it's find me a person who is direct with their boss about what they disagree on, and I'll find you 50 people who aren't to balance that out, you know. And what's really interesting for me, at least the perspective I'm coming from, when I started running Brojo, we ran it through Meetup, you know, the app or whatever. And what we got a lot of was people who had just come to New Zealand. And so there was a lot of Asians and Indians and people from all over the world. And so around the table, we always had this really big cultural mix. And often people, like, they're not raised here and, you know, came from somewhere else. They, like, just got here. And the issues they had with confidence and the solution of those issues with honesty was the same for all of them. It went underneath the layer of culture. You know, the person who does the polite thing with their parents because of the hierarchy in Chinese culture has the same sense of disconnect and feelings of neglect and wishing that they could connect better with their parents than the white guy next to him who snuck out of home so he could drink because his parents wouldn't let him. You know, we were just so unified night after night at this table with the same issues, and when we practiced honesty with the same solutions. You know, and I'm not, this weird thing, about 2 years ago, before my daughter was born, I had this conscious thought, like, I'm giving up on saving the world. I'm just giving up on it. It's too big for me. It's like trying to empty the ocean with a bucket. I just can't do this.
Man, only that recently you came
really,
to that epiphany?
I've been
Christ.
butting against that wall for a while. I thought, you know, could we actually get a complete, like, counterbalance on the weights? You know, I'm seeing guys like Sam Harris and stuff come to the top and like, man, this honesty thing might take off. Maybe we'll get into it. And then, like you say, if you look at, say, Vietnamese culture, you're like, I'm fighting against that. Good fucking luck. Anyway, so I came to this point where I'm like, this burden's too much for me. It's probably egotistical anyway. Just let it go. I'll just help one person at a time. And I'll tell you what, no matter where they come from, no matter the colour of their skin, one at a time, that work on becoming more honest generates a life where they enjoy themselves more, where they're more confident and their relationships and career and everything work out, no matter where they're situated in the world so far. Now, I've got a small sample size, granted, but this isn't a scientific study. I don't give a fuck. This is just helping one dude at a time, and it being more honest always seems to work. At least, when I say work, it doesn't mean instant rewards. There's what I call the swamp that you have to get through first, undo all the lies, but after that, they like being themselves more. And I'm utterly convinced that, you know what I saw on the other, it wasn't about culture, it was about traditions, but what's the difference, right? So we said traditions are peer pressure from dead people. And now that I live most of my time in the Czech Republic, I just see that. These people doing this like traditional stuff all the time, they don't even know where it started. They don't know why they do it. They feel pressured to do it.
That's a good one, actually.
And that's what I think of as any culture that, and I would say New Zealand culture, UK culture, somewhat American, not so much, that pressures you to be dishonest. You know, it doesn't mean that you're going to enjoy that, even if everyone else is doing it, even if it's accepted. It doesn't mean you're going to have high confidence. It doesn't mean that it'll work well with you. It's like eating unhealthy. It doesn't matter what culture.
Yeah, no, exactly. That's actually a really apt analogy, I think, and that's the reason I sort of bracketed my point before by saying I was playing devil's advocate, because I'm with you all the way. I think this is not a case of being ethnocentric. I think there's plenty of bad to go around in both the East and the West, and I frankly hate that fucking divide anyway. I hate that conceptual divide of East versus West anyway. But I think this idea that you have to look at concepts like this through the lens of cultural origins. It's just a way of shifting the accountability and shifting the responsibility for the problem. If you're going to say someone is leading a dishonest life, and they're leading a life which is where they're bound up in behavior around people pleasing and manipulation, and it's self-sabotaging and all the rest of it, who gives a fuck culturally where that originally stemmed from? Like, who gives a fuck if it's stemmed from Confucian values or Western Enlightenment values? Dishonesty is dishonesty. And I'm with you. Like, I actually have found that my non-Western clients have found the point somewhat provocative, that it's always good to be honest, and fuck what your ancestors think and fuck what your grandparents think and all the rest of it. You should just tell the truth because it'll make you a better person, and it's good to be as honest as you possibly can. They'll have a kind of an epiphanic moment where the penny lands and clatters around in their brain for a second, and they're kind of like, huh. But then thereafter, you can actually make some real headway because a point has been affirmatively made. And I think for people from the West, to a point you made earlier, I think at a policy level, I think at a theoretical level, we have kind of, we've sort of spoken this party line or sung this party line about how in the West we embrace unabashed individualism, we embrace saying what's really on our mind, we say, we say what's really in our hearts, and we don't. That's a fucking fantasy. That is an absolute, and I actually said this to my students a few weeks ago. I actually said, I was telling them, I think that the textbook here, basically the textbook divided the countries of the world into individualistic countries, predominantly in the West, and then collectivistic countries, predominantly in the East. The individualistic countries are all about individual freedom and individuals having the right to speak up for themselves, and all that kind of thing. And the collectivistic societies were all about social harmony and doing things for selfless reasons and universally altruistic reasons and societally motivated reasons and stuff like that. And it's bullshit on both sides. Like basically you have selfish people and selfless people in the West. You have selfish and selfless people in the East. It is all a matter of human biobehavioral, neuropsychophysiological, I should say, diversity. Your culture, your cultural background might help explain some of the behavior, but it doesn't excuse the behavior, and it certainly doesn't mean the behavior, if continued to be practiced and continued to be adopted, is going to be helpful for you. Like what are you going to say? Like you're in a jam with your job or your relationship or something like that. You're finding that you're people pleasing at every single opportunity, trying to save face, trying to like manipulate conversation so that you come off better and stuff like that. What are you going to do when it's revealed to you just how much of a chasing the dragon exercise that is? You're going to defer back to your cultural origins and say, well, you got to understand, I'm Vietnamese, and so it's of course just part of our culture that we do things like that. Ridiculous, right? I mean, absolutely ridiculous.
But you can sort of plant the flag with extreme examples. If you take, say, Sharia law, and a woman gets gang raped and her punishment for adultery is to get stoned to death. Give me a reason why that's a good idea, right? I don't care if you're from that culture. That's bad behaviour. That's unhealthy behaviour. Any way you want to measure it, the well-being of everyone involved goes downhill in that exercise.
Yeah, sorry, can I just interject for just a second there and just say, I mean, having spent almost 5 years in American academia and in the social sciences as well, having a front row seat to some of that shit. I legitimately heard people who postulated apologetics of that kind, who said things like, well, you have to understand it's all about cultural background, we must contextualize it and things like that. It's just like, nah, I'm pretty sure stoning a raped woman to death for the crime of being raped, that's universally morally repugnant, and if you think otherwise, you can get fucked with your ethnocentrism charges.
Well, those people are liars, because tell you what, let their daughter go through that. Let's see if they resist.
Yeah, right, exactly.
It's bullshit.
Yeah.
They're all fine if it's on the other side of the world, it's some brown people they don't know, right? If you bought it home...
Racism of low expectations.
Yeah, right. If you bought that home, they would have a pretty sweet change of tune, just like somebody might justify dishonesty in some way, and then you do it to them and it pisses them off. So why is a double standard? The reason I sort of give that extreme example is like, okay, so if you agree on that extreme example, well, let's wind it back less extreme, and at some point we get to sort of basic dishonesty. At what point do you stop making cultural justifications for this? Because any culture that I've ever been remotely aware of can justify dishonesty if it wants to. But as you said, sort of neuropsychophysiologically, we don't actually have a good justification for dishonesty. This is one of the things that I can't wait until there's more study in this, but I don't know who's going to fund it. But I've got a hypothesis. People living honest lives have higher well-being than people who don't. It's a general hypothesis, and it's one that I live by, and I have not seen any counter evidence to this so far, and I'm looking for counter evidence because I quite often get the question like, what's the one situation where it's okay to lie? People always love to throw that one at me. Or I ask them, give me one that will convince me. I'm going to go, okay, I'll give you that one, And I always get these extreme ones like the Nazis are coming for Jews that I'm hiding in my house or whatever. But the reason I sort of get into that is I'm yet to hear of any example where being dishonest is better for your long-term well-being than honesty is. Now, there's plenty of times where being dishonest is better for your short-term gratification and emotional comfort. The list is endless. It's almost every situation. Lying can get you a nicer outcome than honesty can. But in terms of ending up being a person you like being, ending up being in relationships with people who are good for you and you don't have to hide, and ending up on your deathbed going, yeah, I did a good job done, no regrets. I just can't see dishonesty leading there. I study psychopaths as a fucking weird obsessive hobby, basically, because I used to work with psychopathic personalities so much. And I saw some surprising research recently, I'll try and flick you a link, that showed that even narcissistic personalities who con people all the time end up dissatisfied with their relationships in the long term. So even they, who don't really care about connection, end up dissatisfied with the way that they connect with people, that dishonest way. And with like DBT, they can be trained essentially to be honest, and they generally find that more enjoyable. It just doesn't occur to them because it's not really natural to connect in that way, because it's less hassle. Basically, they get into less trouble, they have less fallouts, they get less prison time. It's one of the ways when we used to work with, like, when I used to try and rehabilitate, if there is possible, truly psychopathic personalities, it was based on a hassle factor. Here's a way of living that's less hassle for you. And that was the case. If nothing else, them living more honestly, they got into less trouble, they had less sort of plates to spin, and they're actually on board with that. And that's the kind of most dishonest personalities.
No, let me, because we've got to start winding this up, but I want to transition this. I think it's a good tee up for the final topic I want to cover with you. So I'll just put it to you then. Is Jacinda Ardern, by the end of her life, going to end up a dissatisfied person because of the way that she's performed and acted as Prime Minister of New Zealand? Just referring to this article that you sent me, that you wrote recently, a very provocative and an interesting piece that we can perhaps dissect. But yeah, just that first question off the bat, do you think she's going to die an unsatisfied person because of the political career she's led?
I don't know. And possibly not. But if you'd asked me, will she die less satisfied than she could be, then the answer is yes. See, the article I sent you was, as I mentioned in it, it was writing from a takes one to know one perspective. I learned psychopathy myself, partly because I have a kind of tendency towards it. I score pretty high in certain traits. But on the job, when I'm managing pedophiles and murderers and I'm having to make these brutal decisions to cut them off from their family or send them to prison for many years, and I have to make these decisions quickly and without feeling, I learned to be psychopathic, at least on the job. And I look back at that now, and the only gains I got from that is recovering from it. You know, when I look back at that now, that did not improve my health. I actually ended up having to go to therapy for like vicarious trauma that I wasn't dealing with properly. While I got the job done, it bled out of the job. I became more apathetic with my friends. I couldn't reach a certain range of emotion. The highs and the lows were like cut off to me. I was in this bland band in the middle. And it's interesting, I can see the same in her. Like, obviously, when you see someone doing a press conference, you're seeing the most polished, performed, careful thing. But, you know, when she first came on the scene, and everyone noticed her, and I bought into it when I first saw her. I'm like, holy shit, she's like a real person. What's going on? What's happening to politics, you know? You could see it. You could see the feeling in it. You could see she was like a real person. She really felt compassion. She got hit with all those big hits right at the start, the terrorist attack, the big volcano thing. There's all kinds of shit happened right out of the gate for her. But now you see her and she's a politician now. She's hardened, she's careful, she ducks and dives when she's talking. There's not that directness or that transparency that we might have seen at the beginning.
Don't you think she would have needed to do that in the first place, though, to get into that position, to actually, you know, maneuver herself into the position? I mean, you know, taking your logic the whole way to the bottom, surely she would have had to put some of that toolkit into place to even put herself in that position to begin with.
Yeah, it's hard to say because how she got the job was kind of like she was runner-up and then got the hospital pass. So I don't know how political she was to get to the top, if that's what you're asking. But she certainly politicized pretty quickly after that. You know, you see those pictures of American presidents, popes, of the before and after their terms served, and just how they aged like 50 years.
Yeah, like George Bush. Like, George Bush was like this handsome dude when he got into, I mean, you know, like, got the satellite ears and everything, to be sure, but, you know, he was a, you know, handsome, debonair-looking guy, you know, from an aristocratic family when he came into office, and that photo of him, that emblematic photo of him standing next to Obama, who was on the way in, Obama's looking all fresh and chipper, and Bush, I mean, especially after what Bush put the world through and, you know, put himself through. Jesus, he just looked like he'd aged fucking 40 years.
Oh, I think Obama's one's even worse. He looks like his own dad.
Yeah, it's shocking. You know?
And the lines in his face and the grey in his hair, it was so shiny when he started. He's just dusty at the end of it, you know?
Yeah.
So to tell me that their well-being has been increased is, you're going to have to sell that one pretty hard. With someone like, there is the possibility, I think, depending on how long someone lives, is that they convince themselves egotistically that they are something that they're not, an arrogance, you might say, and they carry that to the grave, and they never have that kind of, they never open the door to the truth behind that, possibly. But like I said, the best way I can answer your question is, she could have led in such a way that she'd be super proud of it later, rather than just a bit proud. Like, one of my, I guess you'll never know the truth of what happened in his mind, but Nelson Mandela is like one of my favourite leaders of all time, and his book, The Long Walk to Freedom, is such a great read. And in particular, this bit where just before he went to prison, he was made an offer. Basically, fuck off out of it forever, and we'll leave you alone. And you stay here, we're putting you in prison for a very long time. But we're going to give you this out, this back door, as long as you stay away and stop ruffling feathers like you've been doing. And he said, no, put me in prison. I have no doubt that this guy who went to prison for decades, he lost his eyesight because of the Lyme and all that shit that he had to do and all that. The guy who had the integrity to shake hands with the racist nationalist party because it was the best for the country. It was the only option that was going to get any ground moving forward, that was going to reduce the harm in any way. Like, the way he felt about himself on the way out has got to be, 100 times greater than anything Jacinda's going to feel at the end.
But don't you think, I think you have to follow your own example the whole way through here. Don't you think that everything Mandela did could have been just as calculated? So sure, he had to do a lot more. Jacinda Ardern didn't have to spend 27 years on Robben Island or anything like that, right? But once he gets into that position, I'm sure you mentioned this about Zelensky in your article. You dig a little bit scratch a little bit under the surface. This is something that's actually shat me to no end about the recent Ukraine thing, is just how much beatification and lionization has been of Zelensky, when all I can think even before I read your article, all I could think was, I bet if CNN and MSNBC invested 5% of the scrutiny that they apply to someone like Joe Rogan to someone like Zelensky, in 5 minutes they would uncover shit that's 5,000 times worse. And I think this is just, and maybe this is a good sort of part to sort of wind down the conversation on. I think your article made some really, really good points, and I think some observations that I mostly agree with, but I think it overshot itself in a couple of key places, which rendered the whole analysis a little bit questionable. Just a couple of things. One, I'd be interested to get your take on this. Maybe I'll ask you that second, actually. First thing I'd say is, you mentioned Marcus Aurelius at the end. I think Marcus Aurelius must be the prime example of a historical figure who has played that game to the nth. If you want to talk about learned or crafted psychopathy, that guy must be a historical master, if we're to take your point and your proposition at face value. And I would say that, I can only speculate on this. I suspect there might be a bit more of that in someone like Nelson Mandela than perhaps you or myself or anyone else is sort of inclined to suggest, because we think about someone like Nelson Mandela and what he did to liberate an entire country and all the good that's associated with his life's work, and you feel awful bringing that into question, saying something like, he was just another career politician. He just happened to be one that was in prison for 27 years, biding his time, waiting for that opportune moment where he was going to start the process towards self-aggrandizement and self-actualization, narrow self-actualization in the way that all politicians do. So there's that. But the main thing I took away from your article is, one, I think your take on psychopathy was too loosey-goosey. But second, I think that it was more a case of every mention of the word psychopath or learned psychopathy in that article, if you swapped it out with career politician, it would have just made more sense. I think there's nothing in your article that necessitates actual psychopathy, whether it's learned or innate, that you couldn't just more parsimoniously ascribe to being a career politician and getting progressively better at playing the game. Now, maybe you will push back and say, well, part of playing that game is developing some sort of psychopathy. But I think that in the article, the traits that you listed, that you sort of said are common to all politicians, they are necessary for psychopathy, but not sufficient to describe it. So, but anyway, I've said a lot there, so I'll let you unpack and respond to that.
Let's start with Mandela. One of the key things I learned, especially working with psychopaths, is overall self-protection. And I've made a point before about Putin. If you want to change the way he does things, you have to make it in his best interest. That's the key here, to understand how a psychopath functions. Is it's got to be the win for them, whatever it is you're trying to get across. I can't think of any psychopath, unless they're a criminal who enjoys being in prison, taking the prison option with no end in sight, no guarantees of sort of any kind of success afterwards, when they don't have to. The self-preservation instinct in highly psychopathic personalities is just too strong. Whereas the example I kind of used lightly in the article, Jacinda Ardern could have gone and spoken to the Wellington protesters. And I would argue that a strong leader would have done that, because there was potential for harm to be done. And if someone strong just stepped up and go, look, I'm going to listen to you, I might not agree with you, but let's try to resolve this. And she just hid behind the wall, preserving herself, knowing that's not going to get me any votes to go out there, fuck him. Whereas, I can only be hypothetical here, a Mandela type would have gone and spoken to them. He would have put himself on the line, and that's what separates him from true psychopathy, or even truly learned psychopathy. Now, to go to your point, like, what's the difference between career politician and learned psychopathy? I don't know if there is a difference. That's one of my problems with sort of modern democratic politics, is you can't have integrity and move up. It just doesn't work. But I think the point I was getting to, especially with Jacinda, is the absolute decrease to almost zero of her empathy. You know, she started, I believe, I can only assume she started as an actual empathetic person, and it just happened to be good flavour of the month. Like, that works with whatever came before. People like, I like this. And unfortunately, that's what happens often with learned psychopathy. When you have a genuine trait become quite popular, you end up manufacturing that trait to get more of the popularity, and now it's not genuine anymore. And so what we got is, she ended up, or at least in my opinion, kind of virtue signalling empathy rather than actually living by it. Now, she talks a lot of empathy, but when you actually look at what she does and how her policies affect people, it's quite, you have to be quite willing for people to be harmed knowingly, which is basically the opposite of empathy, in my opinion. So there was a lot of my kind of opinion and everything in that article. It wasn't exactly the most scientific thing in the world. But I guess the point, to kind of come back to the head, the point really is this kind of honesty. When it comes to the Mandela example, he would have been untrue to himself to take that deal, to not have to suffer as his brothers did, and to just cruise on out in exile and chill. And with Aurelius, all we know of him is the recovered documents of his journal, basically. Everything else is kind of hearsay and supposition. But if that is accurate, that's a guy being quite honest with himself. He was very hard on himself, and very sort of, I don't know, call it, this will be nothing more than intuition, but I'm very kind of hypersensitive to honesty and dishonesty, and I get a sense, kind of red flag, green light kind of system in my head when I think I'm looking at honesty or dishonesty. And when I read the meditations, I'm like, this is a guy trying to be as honest with himself as possible. I'm very sure of that. I can't prove that in any way. And if he's doing that, then he's not psychopathic, because psychopaths lie to themselves more than anything else. They tell themselves a story of what life is. You know, it amazed me when I used to work with murderers and stuff. I thought they knew they're full of shit, and we just got the bullshit. But no, the reason they're so good at lying is because they've already convinced themselves. It used to blow my mind how a pedophile would convince himself that a child came onto him. And then, so when he's telling the court, he's adamant. He's like, dude, I was trying to push her away. He's like, no, that didn't happen at all. How did you get to the point where you can sell that story so hard? And the only conclusion I can come to is because you actually think that. Like, these guys in police interviews, they never get caught out with the cross-examination and the tricks and everything, because in their mind they're telling the truth. They've made it true. Whereas, like I said, when I read meditations, I'm like, here's a guy trying very hard to call himself out on his own bullshit. Psychopaths just don't do that. They don't want to.
Well, what about say Jacinda with the hijab though? So the example that you gave in the article. So, I mean, to me, that one, at the time, I felt there may have been a slight PR aspect to it. Maybe I still feel that in some respect. I think, again, you might have over-exaggerated the case a little bit in the article. I don't think it was quite as crafted. I don't think there was quite as much call it psychopathic forethought that went into it. I think it's actually possible to be simultaneously self-considered and other-considerate. You know, I think that I'm only speculating here. As much as I think you might be speculating about what's in Jacinda's mind, I can only speculate about what's in her mind. And the fact that we're calling her Jacinda like we're on fucking first-person terms with her, it fucks me off. This is where the empathy thing has gone way too far. Prime Minister Ardern, when Prime Minister Ardern made that decision to wear the hijab and perhaps be opportunistically caught in the crosshairs of a photographer's camera lens, I think she simultaneously could have been thinking, this will score me political brownie points, and I genuinely want to show in a visible and salient way solidarity and kinship with a specific subsection of the population who are really grieving right now. I don't think those two things are naturally mutually exclusive, you know. And I think actually maybe this is just kind of the dance of being a politician in general, and you know that you actually don't need to be a psychopath, learned or otherwise. There are just as a politician, and especially someone who is in a position of accountability and responsibility like she is, the incentive structure is just so fucked. You know, maybe this is giving her too much of extending her too much of an olive branch here, but I think for someone in the highest echelons of power, the incentive structure is so fucked that even when you're genuinely motivated from a position of, I want to show solidarity in a visible and salient way with the people who are hurting right now, you can't help but come off as calculated and self-centered and politically savvy and all the rest of it. And this is where I think maybe the psychopath framing is not an apt one. I'm not saying, by the way, that that should close her off from scrutiny. And I think there's a lot about her prime ministership that should be scrutinized, that should be criticized. I think her, even though I think New Zealand's handling of COVID has been exemplary compared to most of the rest of the world, certainly her transparency and her honesty about it has not been exemplary. And so maybe this is just a case of, the more you get to the top, and maybe this is actually really just echoing what you largely expressed in the article. Maybe when you do get to the top and you do get to that apex of power, you do have to just adopt these learned behaviors if you are to survive, if you are to prosper, if you are to thrive in that position.
Well, tell you what, how I'd put it is, contextually, that was early on, that event. And I'd say you're seeing the learning process happen. You know, she wore the hijab, she took the photo, it worked out very fucking well for her. And my opinion is, if she didn't, we'll give her the most generous assumption, she was genuinely empathetic and just a little bit calculated. Well, I think that's about as generous as we can get with that. Is like, she's like, it wouldn't hurt to get photographed with this. Even if she told herself the story of like, I'm just trying to promote the Muslim community, it's sort of like, I'm still the one getting photographed, right? Like, it couldn't be someone else getting photographed. It's got to be me. It's got to be my face on the camera, not the victim, so on. So I'll give her the most generous assumption is she genuinely felt it. It's quite possible she did. And that was just a little bit of like, I've got a job to do as well, you know. What I think is she got a taste, and because that was actually quite a big one for her, and because she stood out. When you see like George Bush's reaction to 9/11 or whatever, and you just see the difference, where he's just like, I'm busy, you know, no hugging of anybody. She just stood out, and she became instantly famous as basically the most empathetic, caring politician in the world, but still respectable with some masculinity, you know, it's required to let this perfect balance of feminine and masculine. Everyone was just raving about her, and like fame or power or wealth, I think it got to her head. And what we see, if we could take context, if that was the beginning of the learning process, we're now seeing her near the end, which is now she would definitely, in my opinion, do something that, and it would be mostly calculated and very little real empathy. And she's moved along that spectrum over the time that we've been watching her, and I think that event was a catalyst for that. She got a taste of it and started to get her value system warped by it. And there's a difference between, say, the learned psychopathy of a surgeon who's like, look, I've got to cut up bodies, I can't be weeping about it, and they consciously learn to do that, but they still hug their kids and they don't see their kids as a piece of meat, right? Or neuroscientist Sam Harris was talking about, like, he doesn't see his children as like atoms giving rise to cuteness in his consciousness or whatever. Like, he just sees a kid and he just loves his kid, right? He can turn it off when he gets home. I worry that someone like Jacinda has not deliberately built this up, but has been kind of corrupted by it. And now, I wouldn't be surprised if she can't turn it off at home. Because here's the most controversial point I'll make about it, and I know it's controversial because I got a lot of shit for making this point in the past. I really got to preempt this by saying this is not because she's a woman. Alright? She had a kid while Prime Minister, right? That was quite groundbreaking. I don't think I've ever seen that before. Partly because I've never actually seen many female prime ministers, and partly because I haven't seen many young prime ministers, but I've never heard of a prime minister having a kid while in office. I just simply haven't heard of it, even if it's happened heaps. I just haven't heard of it. And having just the timing, because I just had a kid, and I know so much about child psychology and the need for connection and everything that happens, and the attachments that happen in the first 3 years particularly being important. I'm like, how many hours a week is she being Prime Minister? 90? 100? How many hours a week does she have to connect with her own daughter? 0? 1? 2? Not much. Not much for a mum, and call me old-fashioned, but I actually believe that the connection with the mother is even more vital than the connection with the father in the first few years. Not in general, but in the first few years. And you can even dismiss that point if I'm wrong about that.
No, I think that's pretty much incontrovertible among all mammals, right. I think.
So here she is. She could have stepped down just temporarily. She could have let someone else take the limelight and be the boss while she did what was right by her daughter. But at some point she deliberately went, nah, I'm going to stick with the being in charge thing. Now, most generous assumption I can possibly make in that situation is that she's unwittingly come to the conclusion that this won't harm her daughter, that this won't harm her attachment with her daughter or her daughter's development, and that she's just naive. The problem with that generous assumption is that Jacinda Ardern is clearly highly intelligent, and the likelihood that she does not know what effect this will have on her daughter has got to be minimal. Which means, and this is the bit where I get really like, wow, she went, looked at her daughter and looked at the job and chose the job. Now, I really promise, if a father did the same thing, I'd have the same criticism. Because Prime Minister is not a normal 9-to-5 job that you got to do to put food on the table for your family. It's a 90-hour a week, you're away all the time, you don't spend any time with your family job. And she doesn't need to do that. She's got a TV presenter as a husband, they've got plenty of cash. This is not some poor family that has to do the double shift because they can't survive without it. She does not have good survival justification for keeping this job up. She's not a normal person doing a normal job. She could have taken second in command and had plenty of time to bond with her kid. Even if just for the first year, it would have made a huge difference. And that's where I go, whoa, she's lost her empathy. She's placing being in the top job over the development of her kid, and this is where it just gets personal and opinionated, I've got to admit, for me. But even me, somebody nobody knows, with no profile, no power, I cut my work hours in half to be with my daughter, and I'm the father, right? I'm living what I preach here. I know the first 3 years of my daughter's life are super critical, and if I get them right, I can fuck up the rest, basically. She's going to be confident if I get this first 3 to 5 years right. So I owe it to her. I brought her into this world. She didn't have a choice in that. I've got to get this bit right as much as I can. And so I look at another parent deliberately, knowingly choosing to go, nah, fuck him. I'm going to go do this other thing where I'm the cool person or whatever. Again, you can hear the opinionated kind of emotion behind it. But I look at her, I'm like, yeah, I've seen psychopaths do the same thing before. Like, this is right up there in terms of callousness, in terms of ego, in terms of grandiosity, in terms of like deluded sense of what's important. And so I'll write that all off as complete opinion with no facts to back it up. But that's why I've got that's why when I go back and look at her past, I've got this very skeptical, suspicious scope, because I'm going from the end result and go, look where we ended up. And then I go back to the start and go, like, has this been happening the whole time?
Yeah, look, I mean, I can't say that you're wrong. And I think this is actually where, look, I mean, as someone who was living in the US for, a few years just after she'd taken the reins, I got so sick, even as someone who thinks that on balance, especially looking at my home country from afar, that she has done a very, very good job, and she's been a good steward of our country, if nothing else. I think she's the best argument for a New Zealand republic that we've ever had. Someone like her should be president, not prime minister, right? She should be someone who is our head of state, representative to the world, and so forth, not day-to-day domestic management and legislative operations. That's what I sort of see about her. But the thing that used to shit me, man, is like every day after she became prime minister, hearing from these Americans who knew nothing about her political accomplishments, who knew nothing of what her actual policies were, who knew nothing about really her as a person or as a politician, just gushing over the fact that she is a young female prime minister who ostensibly seems empathic, cosmetically seems very caring, superficially seems very compassionate and so forth. And she may genuinely on some level be all of those things, but it was the unquestioned, oh my God, she's so awesome kind of thing. Like I'll give you an example, and then we'll have to wind it down. But I had a friend of mine, actually an ex-client of mine, who was talking about how awesome she thought Jacinda Ardern was. And I don't even know why I responded to her this way, but I said to her, a lot of my friends back home who vote for National, the opposition party, they think that Kiwi Build, her signature domestic policy, has been sort of a failure. That this was kind of her big signature policy that swept her into power in the first place, and she was going to build all these affordable, low-cost houses for low-income people, and it didn't work. And this person from the American Pacific Northwest who knew nothing about her looked me square in the eyes and said, "You're wrong, and your friends are wrong." And that to me just said everything. I mean, she if a second later I told her the policy was Kiwi Rail and not Kiwi Build, she wouldn't have even noticed, kind of thing. It was just the fact that I pushed back on any level against this avatar of like outward empathy and just, again, this gushing, oh my God, she's so amazing factor. The fact that I pushed back against that factor at all was enough for this person who was so swept up in the tide of Jacinda mania to just look me in the eyes and say, on a policy level, about a policy I know nothing about, in a country that I'm not from and not familiar with, you're wrong and your friends are wrong. I mean, that to me absolutely said everything. So, I take your point on a bunch of fronts there, and I like to think that I've got a much more measured view of Ardern than some of her most ardent supporters, would claim, but I don't know, maybe I've been taken in by the by the stage magic as well. Who knows? Maybe I've been swept up in the tide of Jacinda mania myself. But dude, we're gonna have to wrap this up. Unfortunately, I feel like we could launch into another over an hour and a half at this point, bro. But man, you've been extremely generous with your time already, and it's always a pleasure. It's always a lot of fun, and it seems that we always follow our noses down many fascinating avenues, and it feels like we could have followed our nose down a lot more. So appreciate you being here, man. Appreciate everything that you do. Keep up all the good work. Keep writing those provocative pieces, and hopefully we can do this again sometime.
I feel the same way, man. I like it. Like we actually disagree on quite a lot, but I enjoy it. It's we find some, like, it just always moderates my view a little bit and causes me to look at the holes, and I like that actually. And we agree where it matters, I think, in terms of integrity and confidence and honesty. And yeah, I'm more than happy to talk with you again, mate. It stimulates my mind.
Well, that'd be cool, man. Well, to not be moderate about it, maybe people like us are the great fucking hope for the world, you know?
God save them all.
And if that's the case, I know we're real fucked if that's the case.
Well, you know what? Just on that note, I just got to say, like, sometimes I despair that I have to be a role model. And what I mean by that is I'm like, I'm not even that good. It depresses me.
Right.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
Like, I yearn. When the problem I have with someone like Ardern is it's not her fault that she's the best of what is a terrible system. I'm like, God, I'd love to have a mean-ass leader. Do you know what I mean? One where you're, like, impressed, inspired, not swept away by the propaganda, but, like, actually they just blow you away with their behaviour. And they're humble about it, and like their words speak, their actions speak louder than their words, and you want to be like them, and they don't need to talk shit, they just do it. I'd love to see that at the top of a country just once in my life, and I just haven't.
That's apparently, I could, totally be misinterpreting this, but apparently that's how Americans felt about Eisenhower.
Oh, yeah.
Apparently Eisenhower, after he led the Allies to victory in World War II, he never wanted to become a politician. Like, he fucking hated the idea. He was apolitical, he was non-partisan, and basically he had the Democrats and the Republicans both courting him, saying, you have to fucking do this. You have to be that guy, because 90% of the American public, whether you're an American or a Republican or a Democrat, will vote for you in a fucking heartbeat. Like, I think that's the closest that I understand to, closest that anyone's come to what you've just described there, like a real role model who's just exemplary in their actions, who models behavior for other people to follow, and who, deservedly gets their place on the throne because of that. But yeah, I don't think we're seeing that with even someone that I might have somewhat favorability towards, like Ardern. I certainly, I think she's a competent steward of our government. I don't think she's someone worth fawning over as an amazing human being or anything like that.
Right, she's a good manager. I want a leader, I want...
Yeah, right.
But, like I said, we'll wrap it up there, but the problem is a leader would be an honest person. We have a system that prevents anyone getting up there. So it would have to be some sort of weird coup where the person just is promoted to leadership against their will, because people are just so fucking impressed by them.
You almost need reverse democracy, right?
The guy has to be dragged kicking and screaming.
All these amazing people who don't want to be prime minister or president, you have to choose
I'm
from
absolutely
them.
Convinced that's the system that will save us all, but it's never going to happen. It's nice to think about.
I know, and again, maybe we are the great hope for trying to steer that movement in the right direction. But again, God forbid. God for fucking bid. All right, man. Well, yeah, again, bro, fucking awesome to talk with you as always, and really appreciate your time, man.
See you later.
All right, take care, guys. See you, mate.
And it got me thinking.